Hello, and welcome to ARTminded, the Kimbell's podcast where we discuss the works in our collection, special exhibitions, and offer insight into the world of art. Today, we will be hearing from three experts in Renaissance and Baroque art, Guillaume Kientz, Babette Bohn, and Christiansen, who will be introducing us to a few of the works in Flesh and Blood, Italian masterpieces of the Capodimonte Museum, as they are installed in the gallery. We'll first hear from Guillaume Kientz, curator of European art at the Kimbell Art Museum.
Greco is one of the most fascinating artists of the Renaissance, and actually his own personal history is quite fascinating. He was born in Greece, in Crete, a Greek island, in 1541, and moved to Venice in 1566. There he decided to change his life. He was trained as an icon painter and he decided to become a Renaissance painter. So he learned how to paint in the Renaissance style in Venice. But somehow he didn't manage to find a place in Venice because the city was crowded, a lot of competition, and the market was small. So he decided to move to Rome, who at the time was the capital of art. And in Rome, he met with Giulio Clovio, and actually he made a picture, a portrait of Giulio Clovio. That's the painting we have in the show. And Giulio Clovio was an artist serving the Farnese family, the very powerful Farnese family. And thanks to Giulio Clovio, Greco got allowed to stay at the Farnese Palace in Rome. And the Farnese were the most powerful patron in the art world at the time. So that was quite a luck for Greco to be housed in the Palace Farnese, thanks to his connection with Giulio Clovio. The portrait Greco painted of Giulio Clovio came to us because at some point it ended up in the Farnese collection. That's why it's now at the Capodimonte Museum in Naples. On this portrait, Giulio Clovio seems very proud. He looks straight at the viewer and points a book of his. He was a miniature painter, and actually the book he is holding and pointing at is the Farnese Hours. It's a prayer book, now conserved at the Morgan Library in New York, and at the time it was very famous. He did that for the Farnese, and thanks to this big achievement, he got called the Michelangelo of miniatures. This painting may look a bit unexpected for Greco, because when we think of the artist, we think of very large altarpiece with elongated figures and not a Venetian portrait. But that was what Greco was at the beginning. I mean, he was trained in Venice, so he was under the influences of Bassano, Titian, Tintoretto, and actually his first portraits, when in Rome, they're pretty much in the Venetian style. But if you look at the landscape in the background of the painting, you can, already notice the turmoil that Greco will put in all his pictures after that. The blue, the green, the yellow, the very agitated sky, those are stylistic theaters that will inhabit Greco's works until his end. So in 1570, when Greco moved from Venice to Rome and when he settled in the Farnese Palace for 2 years, he became a Farnese artist, and that's why the Capodimonte collection has two major Greco in its collection. The second painting present in the show depicts a young boy blowing on an ember. It's actually quite a surprising painting because it's very realistic and it's not the Greco we're used to. But that's how we painted the first stage of his career. And it's pretty much Venetian as a subject, and it's actually more a study about the light. It's more about painting a phenomenon than painting an iconography. And what I find especially striking in this picture is that you almost can feel the breath of the young boy. And the more he breathes, the more you have the impression that the painting is going to be lighter and lighter. And the less you would breathe, then the painting will become darker and darker. It actually works like a video more than like a painting. And if you have a close attention at it, you will notice that the material, the paint is very present. That's what the Italian call the impasto, the pictorial material. And that's pretty much present. That means that the painting is in very good condition, and that El Greco tried to play with three-dimension effects. After 2 years he spent in the Farnese Palace in Rome, El Greco apparently had a fight with the Cardinal Farnese, the owner of the palace at the time. We don't know exactly what it was about, but apparently El Greco criticized a lot Michelangelo, the great Michelangelo, of which Cardinal Farnese was a big support at the time, or was lost support at the time. So perhaps of that, Cardinal Farnese got vexed and chased Greco out the Farnese Palace, and actually good for him, because that decided him to, after a couple of years, move to Spain and there have the great career we know he had.
Going from El Greco to the Caracci brothers, who worked around the same time, we will hear from Babette Bohn, professor of art history at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth.
The three Caracci were all born in the city of Bologna in north-central Italy. Part of the Papal States, Bologna is often referred to as the second city of the Papal States, and it really was not an artistic center until the Caracci came along. They began working together, sharing a common studio in Bologna around 1580. The oldest, Ludovico Caracci, like the youngest, Annibale Caracci, they were both principally painters, whereas Annibale's older brother, Agostino, was primarily a professional engraver, although he painted occasionally. The three Caracci are best known today as tremendous reformers of Italian painting in the last years of the 16th and early years of the 17th century. And perhaps the most important single ingredient of their reformation or change in painting style was that they revived the practice of drawing the human figure from life. All three of them are celebrated for this by many of their early biographers, including their Bolognese biographer, Malvasia, writing in the 17th century, talks about how the Caracci drew constantly, even while they were still eating a meal. And Malvasia claims to have a drawing in his possession that was inscribed, I tore this from the hand of Agostino Caracci as he was about to wipe out a frying pan with it. So many anecdotes like this that are all intended to convey the idea that the Caracci drew all the time. And particularly taking a male figure in the studio with or without clothing, posing the model in a variety of poses, both to master one's capacity to portray the human figure and also specifically as preliminary studies for their paintings, really resulted in a freshness and vitality and naturalism and sense of emotional immediacy that arguably had never been seen before in Italian art. And the Caracci arrived at a new naturalism a little earlier then, but also contemporary with the Reformation in painting that was being developed by Caravaggio. But unlike Caravaggio, they arrived there through this very different means of preliminary drawings and particularly drawings from life. Annibale, who is sometimes considered the greatest of the three Caracci, was successful from a very young age. He begins to become famous while he's still a young man in Bologna in his 20s. He paints religious pictures, portraits, mythological subjects. He's quite varied and eclectic. He has a very successful career in Bologna, and then eventually in 1595 moves to Rome in response to the invitation of Cardinal Odoardo Farnese, who's a member of the family that collected the largest corpus of paintings at the Capodimonte Museum. And Annibalé's relationship with the Farnese, and especially Odoardo, is the source of many of the paintings by Annibale Caracci that are presently part of the Capodimonte collection. Annibale painted wonderful, intimate religious subjects such as the Pietà in the Kimbell's exhibition. He painted also sensational mythological subjects such as the really extraordinary fresco painting in the vault of the gallery of the Farnese Palace in Rome, which shows a variety of scenes depicting the loves of the various pagan gods. He was a brilliant and original painter and draftsman. He also is an occasional printmaker. And tragically, he seems to have suffered from a rather depressed personality and ended his life rather unhappy and less productive as a painter than when he began. So he dies relatively young by modern day standards. He's born in 1560, he dies in 1609, and his life, as I said, ended rather unhappily. But in the course of his life, he produced some paintings that really changed the future trajectory of Italian painting, arguably forever. And he also trained a large group of important painters from Bologna, who included some of the greatest artists of the next generation, such as Guido Reni. Annibale himself was unassuming as a person. He he tried to downplay his intellectual capabilities and his pretensions to greatness. He seems to have been a very modest person, but he was enormously inventive, and he produced, as a draftsman, some of the most beautiful head studies, some wonderful chalk portraits in particular that, in my opinion, are among the most beautiful and naturalistic portrayals of real people from the period of, say, the last quarter of the 16th century. He had a real sensitivity to the play of light over surfaces, to the nuances of facial expression, and even to the textures of surfaces like hair or beard or flesh, and the light playing off of those surfaces that have made his drawings sought after by collectors ever since.
Transitioning into the Baroque period, we'll hear from Keith Christiansen, John Pope-Hennessey Chairman of European Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, on the Caravaggio in the exhibition.
I've long been fascinated by the work of Caravaggio, who's probably one of the best known and most sought out artists of the 17th century for any visitor to Rome or to Naples. Caravaggio's whole trajectory is an extraordinary story, but particularly the years that he spent in Naples. It was a short time, 1606 in May. In a quarrel, he kills a person in Rome and flees first to the Colonna estates in Pagliano and then to Naples. Arriving in Naples, famous artist, he has a greater latitude to experiment, to do things that he was not able to do in Rome. His pictures increase in the quality of drama, the dramatic use of light and shadow. This is beautifully seen in the great flagellation of Christ that's included in this extraordinary exhibition from Capodimonte, currently at the Kimbell. I wanted to talk about an auxiliary activity. about Caravaggio during these Neapolitan years, which is the importance of the art market. Caravaggio receives a whole series of important commissions when he's in Naples. Patrons are absolutely avid to have a work by this great arrival from Rome. He's only in Naples for about a year and a half before he moves on to Malta, Sicily, and then he returns to Naples at the very end of his career. Shortly before his death, he's hoping to return to Rome. So there are these two distinct moments of Caravaggio's activity here. A couple years ago at the Metropolitan Museum, we had the opportunity of showing together two pictures from that late moment. One was done, we know, for a patron. The other was done for the market. And so I want to look a bit at the stylistic differences between these two pictures painted at the same moment. One for the market, one for a patron. The degree of finish, the degree of unfinish in the second picture, and it's the unfinished aspect that is so interesting to me. Similarly, at the first time that he's in Naples, he paints the great flagellation of Christ that's in the exhibition as an altarpiece for Tommaso Franchi, for the Church of San Domenico in Naples. But at the same time, he paints a half-length picture of the same subject probably for sale on the market, painted in a completely distinct style. So this really, this talk is about the ways in which the market, which assumes a new place in the lives of artists, plays a role in the level of invention, the lack of finish that they're required to give to a work, the expectations of collectors in Naples at this time. As I say, it's in Naples that he was able to explore this new realm of open brushwork, degrees of finish, and I would even say the enhancing of the use of style to suggest emotional states, an unfinished, almost a brutal style if the figure is a brute, a highly finished style for the sacred figures. This lays down a kind of new dynamic in painting that leads directly into what we think of as the modern world, where artists use style in a variety of modes, a variety of types of brushwork to suggest emotional states, dramatic situations, and so on. The market was an aspect of artistic practice that was not largely considered as recently as 20 years ago, but over the last 20 years we've come to understand that artists in the late 16th, the early 17th century, in Caravaggio in particular, the market became the primary means by which they could establish their reputation, get a foothold in the Roman or Neapolitan art world, and then had the liberty to do things to think, as we say, outside the box, to push the degree of expressivity in their works to a new level of abstraction. I think this is a really exciting topic. Even if we look at an altarpiece like the flagellation of Christ in the exhibition, one can see that the Christ figure receives the strongest light, is brought up to a higher degree of finish. He's lovingly painted to isolate him from the context. The figures on the side are, on the other hand, painted in a looser style, and particularly in the figure on the left side, if you look at his face, you will see that he has used a lack of finish to suggest the brutality of the figure. It has a sort of proto-Goya-like quality to it. And this is a whole new realm that was opened up by being in Naples, where he was not responsive so much to the expectations of patrons as having the liberty, because of his fame, to move in new directions.
The works discussed in this episode embody the contrasts that are so evident throughout the 40 paintings in this exhibition. Beauty and violence, seduction and reverence, tradition and modernity, classical Renaissance composure, and Baroque dynamism. The Farnese family's patronage and the dynamic Italian art market in Rome and Naples were key components in El Greco, the Caracci brothers, and Caravaggio's stylistic explorations, from looser brushwork to the dramatic use of light and shadow, or chiaroscuro, and reimagined compositions of classic Christian and mythological stories. Thank you for listening to ARTminded, and don't forget to connect with us at kimbellart.org to see the art we've talked about in this episode. As always, we thank you for your continued support.